Thanks, Frank. I wanted to give the QCon experience down to I did not change the date on purpose so that we could see when QCon was. If we call this the July SIG, it was a month ago. A lot's changed since Java 9. We've heard a lot about Java 9 because Java 9 had a ton of PR. We heard all about Jigsaw, how modules were changing the world, and we should all be set. And then Java 10 came out and there were sort of crickets. And now we're halfway to Java 11, and well, there's not crickets. There's Oracle sending a confusing message about what's happening. It's time to understand what's really going on. Let's start with a little survey about what language people are on in production. And I'm going to ask the people in Raleigh to participate. I can't see you, so if someone can keep track of the answers and give a summary when I call on you, that would be really helpful. Who's on Java 10 in production? Oh, good, no one. Who's on Java 9? Oh, good, no one. Who's on Java 8? That's about 2/3 of the room. Java 7? It's about 6 people. Java 6? 1, I'm sorry. How did we do in Raleigh?
They are not on Java.
So about half of us.
Okay, cool. And the reason I said good for 9 and 10 is versions 9 and 10 of Java don't come with long-term support. Here in New York, most of us work for banks and various other financial institutions where security and support are big concerns. Java 11 is the next version that comes with long-term support, which is why we're talking about it now, so that we can all be ready in advance for when that day comes. I have a whole presentation on Java 9, which is on speaker deck, as is this presentation, which means you can study them all later. Java 9 had a lot of new features in it, in addition to Jigsaw. Some of the ones that I'm going to be making some references to today are how deprecation changed. There's now the concept of deprecated for removal, rather than mark it as deprecated and leave it there forever. There's also the concept of deprecated since, so you know when something was actually deprecated. There's also Javadoc search, which is really helpful. We don't need Google to search the Javadoc anymore. Javadoc can do it itself. And there's lots of syntactic sugar. But today's not about Java 9. Today's about Java 10 and Java 11. We're going to be talking about the ecosystem and language changes. In the second half, we'll actually be talking about the coding changes that are available in Java 10 and 11 as well. And since this talk is about the release train, we have to have a choo-choo train. For anyone who doesn't know me, I've written a few books on Java, and I'm really involved in the Java forums and the Java community online. Meet Duke. For anyone who doesn't know Duke, Duke is the mascot of Java. Duke's kind of old at this point, so he's got a lot of memories. And we're going to take a little trip with Duke down memory lane. For the first decade of Duke's life, he was owned by Sun. About 10, 14 years after that, Oracle took over. Hi, Oracle. And there was a release shortly thereafter. Probably something we can credit to Sun. Then there was a release 2 years later, and another release 2 years later. Yes, Oracle is still going around saying they used to have releases every 2 years. That doesn't look like 2 years to me. It looks like 3. And there's nothing wrong with releases every 3 years if that's what you're planning on doing. However, that was not what Oracle was planning on doing. They were planning on doing them more frequently, which meant the release schedule was sort of like, well, when it comes out, there'll be a release. Jigsaw is the classic example of that. At first, Jigsaw was, well, maybe it'll be in Java 7. No, we'll go with Plan B and put it in Java 8. It's nowhere near ready. That's definitely true. It was nowhere near ready in 2011. In Java 8, they were like, all right, it wasn't in Java 7. It's going to be in Java 8. And they realized how hard it was, and let's not do that. But you know what? In 2014, it's going to be in Java 9 no matter what, because we're going to hold up the release of Java 9 until it's ready. So Java 9 was released in September 2016, and we all got to start using it. These were all of the release dates that I could find for Java 9. A full year of delays. My product gets delayed for a year, we all get in trouble. How about you? But this is a problem. This means you can't plan, because even when a release date is announced, well, there might be a release on that date. Probably not, but maybe. One of these dates is going to be real. And this is a problem. Duke also learned how to count as a little kid. Duke learned how to count in decimal. 1, 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. Does anyone know what's next?
5.0.
Yes, 5.0, because that's how we count. And after that is not 6.0. What comes next?
6.
Right, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Took a while, but Duke did actually learn how to count the way normal people do. Good job, Duke. Good thing you're learning in school. Duke also learned recently advanced counting lessons. Starting with Java 10, there's 2 version numbers for each version of Java. There's the English number, 10, 11, 12, that we use. And there's also the semantic versioning number, which tells you what year and month Java came out. Originally, the plan was that everyone was going to use the semantic versioning number. The community sort of said not so much, so now there's 2 numbers. Everybody's using Java 10, 11, and 12, except for Oracle behind the scenes, who's using the semantic versioning number. But we can see that there really is a 6-month release cycle now. Java 10 is 2018.3 for March of 2018. Java 11 is September 2018, 2018.9. And who wants to tell us what Java 12 is? Pull it out.
2019.3.
That's right, Java 12 is 2019.3. Pretty easy to infer, to look at it and know when something's going to be released by looking at the semantic versioning number. Wait a minute, there's a major version, 10, 11, 12, coming out every 6 months. We couldn't even get one to come out every 2 years, and now it's coming out every 6 months? I don't know about this. It's not really a major version, in the sense of there's a million new features in it. What it is a major version in the sense that major versions are allowed to have syntax changes in them. Which means that Oracle has to use the version numbers that increment 10, 11, 12, which means we're going to be like Firefox and Chrome where we get up to Java 68. Chrome 68 came out this month, no more HTTP.
Wait, what?
I heard a wait what. Chrome made the decision that if you use HTTP instead of HTTPS, they're going to mark your website as evil and tell people you're insecure to encourage people to be on HTTPS. Bet you didn't think you'd learn that in the Java presentation. But it's good to have incremental syntax changes. It means we're more of an agile approach. We have little changes that are adding up rather than wait for a big bang. Smaller features are a good thing, so we don't have to wait for years of features in order to get anything. Java 10 had 12 new features, and Java 11 had 15. Some of these features are refactoring behind the scenes. Some of these are small things. Some of them are getting rid of an API here or there. But they add up to setting the stage for big features. Some of them are things we care about, and some of them are letting us have things we care about later. Like any student, Duke went to school. Duke went to Java Elementary School. Let's look at Duke's report card and see how he did. First class Duke had to take was Developer Community. I think Duke did a really good job on Developer Community. We look around the room here in New York and on the phone in Raleigh where we can't see you, and there's a good amount of people giving up their evening to learn about Java. Duke gets an A. Good job, Duke. Then we have features. Java's got a lot of features, but you can always have more, so they grade really tough at Java school, and Duke got a B. But that's okay. Duke did well, near the top of the class. Nobody got an A. The curve was so high you couldn't make it. Then we have frequency of release. So we know Duke's a really good student, and really, Duke? An F? And come on, you're saying you're releasing every 2 years and you're releasing every 3 years. This isn't frequent. But okay, it wasn't frequent, but it was predictable, right? Because we knew exactly what date Duke was going to release Java. Duke got a D. So it wasn't frequent or predictable. Not so good. Gotta fix this. But you know what? This isn't fair to Duke. Because Java isn't really about Java anymore. It's about all the languages that run in the JVM, like Ballerina and Scala and all sorts of other languages. So Duke grew up and went to JVM College. Let's see how Duke did in college. First thing Duke had to do was take a vocabulary class and learn about things like polyglot programming, supporting multiple languages on your JVM. Duke did well. Vocabulary is a little tough, but Duke got a B, knows all the words, reviewed afterwards. Then we've got polyglot programming, lots of languages on the JVM. Yes, Duke got an A in something really important. All right, Duke's doing better in college, so now we have frequency of release. F again, and predictability of release, a D again. But you know what? It's even worse here. Because in addition to holding up Java, we're holding up all those other languages that we just learned about. This is a problem. And you know how large companies solve problems, right? They have reorgs. Because reorgs are the way you solve all your problems. So we need to have a reorg at the train station to solve our release train problems. We're going to do a little survey here about how many languages you know. And remember that all of these things are languages. How many of you know 1 or 0 programming languages? Oh, I got a hand. I wasn't expecting that. How many of you know 2 to 5 programming languages? Okay, that's about half the room. And how many of you know 6 or more? That's the other half of the room. And I'm going to assume that Raleigh was similar. When I did this at QCon, I got 1 hand as well for 1 or 0 languages, but it was the cameraman. So the guy in this audience needs to learn some more languages.
Well, no, that's a true statement that I know 1 or 0 programming languages. I know a lot more than that, but...
So I didn't qualify my question properly, is what you're saying. I should have had that coming. So that's good. That means everyone knows at least 2 programming languages. One of the things that a big company does in a reorg is change the names of things. It's just like the reorg solves all your problems, so does changing the name of everything. Up until last year, I'm seeing a nod. You must work for a big company. I won't ask which one. Up until last year, the name of the flagship conference was Java 1. This year, it's Oracle Code 1. And Oracle also had the Oracle Code Roadshow throughout major cities like New York. When this announcement was made, I heard a lot of, oh no, it's the death of Java. It's not the death of Java, just like all of the other things up till now that are predicted to be the death of Java were not the death of Java. Last year was my first year at Java 1. And you know what I noticed? There were a lot of talks that weren't about Java. I heard a talk about Scala, I heard some talks about DevOps, I talk about Git. There were lots of things in the ecosystem. They're all things we need to know as Java stack developers. They're all important, and it's realistic to represent the fact that we're talking about all of these other things. It does not mean Java is dying. It just means that you're not only going to know Java and expect to have a career. Another name change is Java EE. Oracle contributed Java EE, mostly, to the open source community. The mostly comes with 2 disclaimers. One is that Oracle has a lot of lawyers and you're not allowed to use the name Java for anything. The community voted. The new name is Jakarta EE, which is cool because you can still say JEE and Oracle can't get mad at you. The other one is Oracle is currently having a row with the open source community about what happens to the package names that already exist. I hope the open source community wins. Next up is the release model. Before, releases were, who knows. Now there's a schedule, an actual schedule that you can read in advance. It's great. There's a release every 6 months, which is one of those major versions we talked about. There's also a release every 3 years that has long-term support. A place like where I work, or presumably Credit Suisse, is going to care about those long-term support versions. They're date-driven, which is great. Managers like plans. You can plan in advance. This is wonderful. And for developers, it means there's more time to code while you're waiting for the train because you're not constantly trying to figure out when that train leaves. Schedule's good. Our train station has a schedule for when the trains are going to arrive. Java 9 was announced to be released on September 21st of last year, and it came out on September 21st of last year. It was so exciting. Java 10 was announced to come out on March 20th of this year, and guess when it came out? That's right, March 20th. This is good. We actually established a schedule. The next version of Java, the first one with long-term support in a while, is Java 11, which comes out on September 25th. Awesome for me. I'm doing a presentation on September 25th at my company conference. I get to stand on stage and announce that Java was released. We also have departures. Departures are, well, when does support end? Public support for Java 6 and 7 ended a long time ago. Paid support is still ongoing. Paid support for Java 8 ends really, really soon, also known as the end of the year. So for the person who said you were in production in Java 6, make sure your managers know this and aren't caught by surprise. Java 7 has paid support for a good while longer, as does Java 8. What's interesting is when the free support for Java 8 ends. Oracle has announced 2 dates. They've said that you can download updates for Java 8 up until December 2020 if you're an individual, but only until January 2019 if you're a business. I'm still baffled on how they plan on enforcing that because you're still downloading it from the website, but I guess they're relying on businesses following this policy. I don't care that much, because where I work we pay for long-term support, so we've got lots of time left for Java 8. Then we have the future versions, or the newer ones. Java 9 no longer has any patches anywhere, because with the 6-month release cycle, you get patches until the next version comes out, and then no more. Patches are free, they're just not being made for that long. So if you're on Java 9 now, you need to upgrade to Java 10. For Java 10, free patches are going to be made available until September of 2018, when Java 11 comes out. With Java 11, guess what? Free patches, 6 more months. Paid patches, a lot longer. And the reason there's 2 dates is depending on how much money you pay, is how long you can use the product. Also keep in mind that future dates sometimes get extended, so it may be longer than 2028. It depends. Given that that's 10 years from now, I don't think it's something we need to be worried about at the moment. Alright, so let's see if we've been paying attention. Who knows how long Java 12 will have security patches?
6 months.
That's right, 6 months. Good. Everybody's still awake. Next one's a little harder. What's the next long-term support version after Java 11?
14.
17.
17. Who said 17? That's right, 17. There's a release every 6 months, which means there's 2 each year, which is 3 years times 2 is 6, plus 11 is 17. And that's something that's important for enterprise customers to know. It's Java 8 under the old model, and then Java 11, and not again until Java 17 under the new model. Once we start using Java 11, we need to get all settled in. We're going to be with it for a while. And when I say a while, this is no different than the situation between 7, 8, and 9. Those were also 3 years apart. We just didn't know it in advance. I see we have a question.
Aren't the security patches for Java 11 going to be not available to the public?
For 6 months, they will be available to the public for free. I'm going to talk about the OpenJDK, Oracle JDK thing a little later, but they will be free for 6 months, and then you have to go to Java 12 if you're not paying for support. You also want to be on a different downloaded JDK, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. A little bit later is now. There's 2 JDKs out there. There's the Oracle JDK, which is the one you pay for, and there's OpenJDK, which is the one you don't pay for. The Oracle JDK will only be available every 3 years for a version, and frequently thereafter for security patches. The Oracle currently, and for a long time, has issued quarterly security patches, and on extremely, extremely, extremely rare occasions, interim ones. They plan to continue with that. If you're on a commercial JDK, your upgrade options are to go from security patch to security patch, to wait for the next 3-year version of Java, or to switch to OpenJDK. If you switch to OpenJDK, you've got the OpenJDK security model. I'll get to you after this slide. For OpenJDK, there's releases every 6 months. There are 2-ish releases for security and various functionality fixes within that 6-month period. There could be more if an emergency happens. Your choices there are to upgrade to those interim versions or to go to the next version 6 months later. Question all the way in the back.
Yeah, you didn't include IBM's JDK, that's free too.
I did not. I also didn't include Azul or all sorts of other JDKs. The reason I'm talking about OpenJDK is because Oracle contributes to OpenJDK. And what we're hearing right now is the last version of Java 10 came out, which is 10.0.2. It's the last version you can download from the Oracle website, and then Oracle won't be free anymore. It's terrible. Java is dying. Like, Java's not dying. It went to a new URL. Not a big deal. But yes, there are lots of other JDKs out there. They're just outside the scope of what I'm talking about here. Also, they haven't changed their release model, I don't think. So it's not something, if you're using it now, it's going to keep working the way it did before. Good question. At this point, only bug fixes remain. Java 11 went feature complete on June 28th. It's going to be made really available on September 25th. You can use the early access editions between now and then, or the release candidate version starting later this month because it's August now. Time to play. You can download OpenJDK at any point in time. It's currently an early access build. And the best part is all OpenJDK bundles are available as tar gzip files for any operating system. The reason this is awesome is because I'm on a Mac, and if you want to use 2 different versions of Oracle's JDK on a Mac, you get to fiddle with DMG files or use Docker because it's just not worth trying to make it work. With OpenJDK, I have 4 versions on my machine. They all work perfectly fine. I've even set up aliases so I can keep track of what version I'm running. I do a lot of comparisons across different versions of Java. Being able to just press the up arrow and type in a new version, recompile or rerun the same code saves me a lot of time on testing. And it lets me know what I'm running because Java could be anything on my machine. And I'd like to know when I'm working on something important for sure what version I'm using. That completes the first half of the presentation. Are there any questions about the release model before I start talking about code?
I have something about the GPL license. Now OpenJDK is a GPL license, but then a lot of time, if you want to include something like say bouncy castle or something, you have to go and change certain things in the configuration, like security, to add the different libraries. So would that violate the GPL license and have to make it open source or something?
So, I'm not a lawyer, but I don't think so. Also, a lot of enterprise customers that have those cryptography needs are using Oracle's JDK, which already has it in there. So I haven't seen it come up personally, but I think it's okay. I'm not a lawyer. Yes?
Yeah, so to recap, you're saying that after JDK 11 from Oracle, it will be a paid version for enterprises, right?
No, I'm saying that if you're a personal customer or a small company that doesn't need to pay for extended support, starting with Java 11, you're going to type openjdk.net instead of oracle.com to do your download. If you're a paying customer, you're still a paying customer, nothing has changed, except releases are more stable. If you're not a paying customer, you're using a different URL and nothing has changed. Any other questions on the release model? Okay, now we get to talk about code, that's the fun part. There's a lot of new features in Java 10 and 11 that we're going to be talking about here. Some of them because you're going to be really excited to use them, and some of them just because general awareness is a good thing. I have on the top of each slide what version number the feature is in. Some of them have 2 version numbers because there were parts of the feature introduced in 10 and parts in 11. Like any good agile project, you release things in pieces. You don't wait for the entire thing to be done, which means for some features like local variable syntax, you get a minimum viable product in Java 10 and more in Java 11, and possibly more in Java 12. Local variable syntax is a little bit like Ruby and Python and JavaScript, where you don't have to specify the type. A little bit is the operative phrase here. You can see I was able to type var instead of string for my type name. All right, it saved me 3 characters, not particularly impressive. I can do the same thing for list. It gets more useful, I promise. Also, notice how I mentioned a little like. It's a very little like. It's syntactical sugar. It's like generics, it's like the diamond operator. I still have a string, and I still have a list. I do not have, I forgot what it was called, multi-something in Ballerina, where you had union types.
Any type.
Yes, it's not that. It's not that you can have a name and then later assign 2 to it. It's a string. This is just for you as a developer to have less typing. It's also non-immutable. At this time, we don't have val in Java. All right, taking a look, I can assign a literal. I can assign a variable, I can assign its expression, and the compiled code works the same as it always did. It starts to get useful when I have longer code, especially in presentations. In presentations, you can only put so much code on a slide. Not having to waste space with the type is really cool. But sometimes you have variable names where the type is pretty redundant. Volunteer dashboard row and header row, I really don't need to be reminded. It's a row, I get it. In cases like that, not having to type the type is useful. It's also useful when you have really narrowly scoped variables, like with a try block or something that's being used on one line. I have a CSV writer or a CSV printer. From the names, it's obvious what the type is, and if it wasn't obvious, the variable is only in scope for 3 lines. I can look at it, I'm fine. Also, there's code where there's just a lot of natural redundancy. For example, in Java 7, if I want to create a path object, I type path equal paths.get. I get it, it's path. I don't need to type that either. Being like any feature, there's evolution over time. In Java 5, we got generics, and we were really excited that we had type safety. We were so excited we didn't mind that we had to type all that. By Java 7, we were less excited, and we were annoyed we had to type all that. And they gave us the diamond operator, where we only had to specify the generics in one place. Great. We're not any better off with local variable syntax. We still only have to type it in one place, but we're typing it in a different place. And that place makes it a little easier to read the code because it's at the tail end. I can see that I have a map. It's only later that I have to look up the type. So we're moving around the syntactic sugar. We're not actually making it shorter. All right, where can we use this? We can use it to define local variables. We can use it for expressions where the type is known at compile time. We can use it for methods where the type is known at compile time. We can use it for loops where the type is known at compile time. Probably noticing a theme here. You cannot use it as an instance variable. Remember, this is called local variable, not instance variable. So you can't use it in inner classes or as instance variables in your class. You also can't use it if you're not defining the value in the same line as the variable. I can't define the local variable and get around to saying the type later and expect that to work. All right, that's fair. I also have a question for you. And let's see how we do with this. We're going to do a thumbs up, thumbs down vote. Do thumbs up if you think that this code compiles, and thumbs down if you think it doesn't. All right, we're split about 50-50 in New York. How are you doing in Raleigh?
I think we're split.
Hey, that's great. Both sites are on the same page. I work with a lot of telecommuters, so I'm being really inclusive in Raleigh, even though there's only 12 of them. This code does compile. The reason this code compiles is backward compatibility. You could have a variable that you name var at any point in time over the last 20 years, and you want to be able to compile that code in Java 10 and have it still compile. That said, please, 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 please don't write this in your code. This belongs in books like Java Puzzlers or cert guides. It does not belong in your code. Question?
What if you have a type called var?
If you have a class called var, that would also work.
Lowercase var?
Lowercase var. Oh.
That's a good question.
I don't know. I haven't tried it. I suspect not, but that doesn't seem important for backward compatibility because who would do that? And if you have that in your code, you should change it anyway. But I don't know. I suspect that it would not work because it's now a keyword, but I'm not sure. That's an excellent puzzler. I'm going to try that later.
Of course you will.
Well, I want to know. So the pros of local variable syntax are that there's less typing, there's less redundancy if your type name includes what it is, and you can scan the variable names. The cons are a loss of information and variable names matter more, and please be careful so your coworkers aren't mad at you. Also, this is not an excuse to start using Hungarian notation. If your variable name isn't clear without the type, include the type. There's also a nice reference guide that gives tips on when you should use local variable syntax and when you shouldn't. In Java 11, they added support to the local variable syntax for lambdas, which are sort of local, even smaller scope than local variables. We have a few choices for how we write lambdas. We can omit the type at all. We can specify the type, or we can use var. And I know what you're thinking. The whole point of var was to get rid of redundancy, and I didn't have to specify the type at all, and now you're telling me I can type var instead of the type as if it's the best thing on earth. This seems silly, right? Come on. There is a use case for it, though, which is annotations. If you want to use an annotation in your Lambda, you have to have a type, so the annotation has something to reference. But you don't really want to put the type there. You really want to put the annotation there. Being able to specify var instead of my really long type name that involves generics is nice. It is all or nothing. If you're using var in a Lambda, you have to use var for all of the types in that Lambda. Here we have an example with both. You can't mix or match. You can't omit the type. You can't use a traditional type and var together. Not a big deal. Lambdas are pretty small in scope. Our next topic is garbage collection. Duke didn't do so well in school, and his punishment is that he has to take out the garbage forever. In Java 10, they introduced the concept of choose your own garbage collector. Yeah, I know, who cares, right? If you're not writing Java JVM code, you don't care how the garbage collector is implemented behind the scenes. But you do care because of the features that it builds on. This particular feature allows us to have other features that we might care about. Up until Java 8, we have the parallel garbage collector that we know and love. Starting with Java 9, they introduced the first garbage collector, which I'm not going to talk about because Chandra talked about it in this very room a month or two ago. His presentation is linked here. If you didn't see it, I totally recommend reading it. It's an awesome presentation. This slide is also from Chandra's presentation, which shows how they use regions in order to focus in on the garbage and get us faster garbage collection, rather than exhaustive garbage collection. In Java 11, a new garbage collector was introduced called the Epsilon garbage collector. The Epsilon garbage collector never takes out any garbage. Pretty lazy for a garbage collector, right? You only have one job. It proceeds until it ends, or it unceremoniously ends, because you ran out of space for your memory. Now, in order to use this, you have to opt in. This is obviously not something you want to just happen to you, but it is useful in a couple of cases. One of them, especially for us large enterprise customers, is if you want to do a performance or memory stress test. It's kind of hard to see what happens when your program runs out of memory because the garbage collector is trying to make the program not run out of memory, and you're trying to write a test where it does run out of memory so you can see what happens. Using the Epsilon garbage collector greatly expedites the process because you get the garbage collector out of the way. Another one is for very short performance critical programs. Like we're always hearing about Goldman has some things where they're trying to eke every teeny bit of performance. If you can guarantee that your program is going to complete before it runs out of memory, you don't need the garbage collector. And the last one is last-ditch performance improvements. It probably isn't you unless you're Goldman, and maybe it is you. But it's probably not most of us. The other new garbage collector in Java 11 is Z, the experimental garbage collector. Its goal is to have 10 millisecond or less pause time. It'll be interesting to see how this works out. It's currently available on Linux. And for this one, you have to do two things in order to opt in. The first one is you have to have the flag unlock experimental VM options, which could also be called, I really know what I'm doing, and if my program crashes, it's not Java's fault. And then after you do that, you can actually turn on this garbage collector. Tread carefully. Our next new feature is HTTP client. The HTTP client library is not new. It's been in incubating status for a while now, but it's done incubating, it's hatching, it's becoming a real chick, it's so cute. And now we can use it as part of the full-fledged JDK. The library allows you to easily write code that interacts with URLs, more so than the old code. So I create a client, I use a builder to create a request in whatever format I want. I get the response and I do something with it. In this case, I'm just printing out the results, nice and simple. We can also do the same thing asynchronously, where we can collect a lot of URLs that we wish to interact with, ask Java to fetch them all, and then go back and look at them later on one page of code. Decently concise. You can get your data back in a lot of different formats. There's files, there's input streams, there's strings. There's even discarding if you're doing something like a load test and you don't want to be troubled with the data. You can have proxies, you can have security, you can have everything you'd expect, even the standard HTTP verbs. Our next feature is time-based versioning. Time-based versioning is the APIs that work with the release train changes that we talked about earlier. You can ask Java to give you the version. You can ask you to give it a version object, and then you can call methods on that version object. In the past, we had 3 deprecated methods: major, minor, and security. Those printed out the version, 10.01 or 11.00 for the early access edition, just like you would expect them to. The new methods also work as you would expect them to, which is good. We don't have changes to how version numbers work. We have feature, interim, update, and patch. And they also print out 10.01 and 11.00. Let's take a look at what each of those are. Feature is what comes out every 6 months. That's Java 10, 11, or 12. Interim doesn't apply for the OpenJDK because it's such a short release model. It stays with 0. For a JVM that has a longer release cycle like Oracle's, it starts with 0 and they're still figuring out how it's going to work. Updates are planned updates. For OpenJDK, that's 0, 1, and 2 within the 6-month window. And patches are for emergency use. There have not been any so far. Yes! Emergencies are things that make the news. This isn't the type of thing you want in the news. You can also print out the date that your JDK was released. For example, I was playing with the Early Access Edition that came out on April 17th. The Java 10 that came out on April 17th. I was also playing with the Early Access Edition that came out in the future. Yes, the future. Because it was early access, it's telling telling me the date that 11 is going to be released rather than the date that what I happen to download was released, which is fairly arbitrary in the date I happen to download it. There's also a system property, java.version.version. Yes, .version is there twice. I did not make a typo. That's not set for OpenJDK. It's available for vendor use, and this is where Oracle plans to use semantic versioning. That's that 2018.-09 that we were talking about. Finally, we have some odds and ends, little fun features that we can talk about. One of my favorites is that you can now run a Java program in one line. The reason this is one of my favorites is I spend a lot of time mentoring high school students that are new to Java, and you get to explain to them. So you write a Java program, you put some magic in the main method, and then you go to the command line and you type JavaC and the name of your file, and that's going to compile it, and that's okay. And then you run Java, and you don't put the name of it, but don't worry about that. It's not important. It's not the best intro to Java. A far better intro to Java is what we're going to be able to do in Java 11, which is you put this code in a file, and we're going to explain how main methods work, and then you type Java, the command, and the name of the file. It's just as easy as Python, and it runs. It doesn't even produce a class file. It's just in memory, which is really cool. The downside is this only works if your program has one class, but realistically, once you start having classes and dependencies, you're using a real build tool. You're not using JavaC anymore to build, and this is just fine. But it's kind of cool as an intro. There's also unmodifiable collections. You can make copies of a collection both as a command or as a collector in a Java 8 stream pretty easily. That's something that was a little harder to do before, so it's nice to have it be a one-liner. There's nest-based access control. This is a feature that you will not care about in a million years, but I wanted to include it because it's fun. We know what a private variable is, right? Private instance variable, it can only be used in the same class or inner classes. And remember, inner classes compile to different files than outer classes. So in the bytecode's point of view, you have a private variable that's private except for these other classes that are also allowed to access it. As you might imagine, the implementation of that has always been a mess. And nest-based access control removed that hack and cleaned it up. Yes, paying off tech debt. That's something that's important in a program of any age, and it's nice to see that Oracle's making it a priority. We also have some features that were deprecated for removal in Java 9. When Java 9 came out with the whole deprecated for removal feature, they removed a couple features. It's like, oh, it's nice, because there's some features like date that have been deprecated since the dawn of time. I wonder if it's a one-time thing, or if they're going to keep removing stuff. And now we know. Note that this is not Java EE. This is a couple of Java EE things that were inside of the JDK instead of inside of Java EE. They will not be missed, but it's nice to see that they are actually thrown out in the trash. Not the trash that Duke's responsible for garbage collecting, the real trash where you never see it again. PAC 200 tools were also deprecated for removal in Java 11. Those were the things where you could create a very concise JDK jar. That's not needed with modules. You can use JLink to just get what you want and even to compress it, so there's no need for it. It makes sense for that to go away over time. Nash Forum was also deprecated for removal. Who knows what Nash Forum is? Okay, about 10 people. If you're German, I'm sorry that I'm saying it wrong, I tried. Nash Forum was the attempt at running, instead of JShell, which is newer, running this thing that was sort of a hybrid of JavaScript and Java in a REPL that didn't quite work as expected to, and I had to write a chapter on it for a book before they removed it from the or not the best feature. I'm glad it's going away. But it may come back. Because in the JEP for deprecation for removal, they wrote, if somebody is really interested in becoming the owner of maintaining it, there are a couple of groups on the internet that are very angry that it's deprecated for removal because they're relying on it, but nobody seems to be angry enough to adopt it, so it's probably going away. I'd also like to point out something that's cool about this deprecated for removal. It made it into Java 11 on June 26th, which is 2 days before Feature Complete happened, which meant they were quietly working on the JDP and deciding whether it would be in Java 11 or waiting for the next train to come, and it did make Java 11. And I think that's really cool. It shows that the date-based model really matters. If you're not ready for that date, you wait 6 months, nobody's going to wait for you. Our final feature is Unicode, because emojis are really important. We have Unicode 9 support in Java 10 and Unicode 10 support in Java 11. There are a lot of legitimate things in these Unicode versions that are useful, like various Chinese dialects and so forth, but I don't speak Chinese, so I'm showing you porcupines, fist bumps, and pretzels. Things that are very useful to have in your code. And before you're laughing, I like to put the beer emoticon in some of my presentations because it's fun. So to tie this all together, we can write code that I can run in one line without creating a class file, and in addition to inviting you to have a beer, I can also invite you to have a soda. So if you don't drink, we're way more inclusive now, all thanks to Unicode 10. In conclusion, there's no need to be puzzled. Java 11 is the next LTS version. There's releases every 6 months or 3 years. There's lots of new features. Remember to go tell your manager and team to be ready for September. To complete the QCon experience, there's a nice virtual survey form that you can fill out, and I will take questions.
Any questions from Ollie?
Any questions from Raleigh?
Got a quiet bunch today.
Well, we do have a question here in New York, yes?
In your Corba deprecated example, did it say that it was deprecated removal in Java 9?
Yes, and now it's actually removed. In Java 11, they removed it.
So was it deprecated already in Java 8?
I don't think so. I think it was deprecated for removal in 9, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. We need to check the Javadocs.
For an LTS customer, they wouldn't actually see the deprecation, they would just disappear between their feeds.
They wouldn't see it in the, they wouldn't, the question was if you're an LTS customer, you wouldn't see the deprecation before it disappeared. And that is true in that it wouldn't be deprecated in the version you're on, but you did have a year notice, right? It was announced, so even if you didn't pull in the code, it is useful to be tracking what features are there, and there was some notification of it. The other thing is if you're an LTS customer, you probably aren't downloading and going to production with it the day it comes out, so you've also got some lead time there. But yeah.
I didn't quite understand deprecated for removal is like a special annotation, or is the features
It's
within
an so deprecated for removal is an attribute in the deprecated annotation. It's a way of signifying intent because there's different types of deprecated. There's deprecated like for date, where it's deprecated in that it would be better if you didn't use it, but so much stuff is reliant on it that realistically it'll be with us forever. And there's deprecated for removal that we're signaling that this is going to be removed, and it would be nice if you got off of that before it happens so you don't have a big emergency.
for the deprecated, basically what I have seen, it would have been better if they could have given an attribute saying what is the replacement as an attribute over there. So if I want to say
That's what the comments are for.
Yeah.
Seriously though, that's free form. That's kind of hard to stick in an attribute.
Attribute has, okay.
Attribute of a comment. Was there a question over here? Bunch of people scratching their heads.
What's happening with JavaFX?
I don't remember. Does anyone know what happens with JavaFX?
So it's not part of JDK, right?
JavaFX is part of the JDK.
No, I think so
I
they,
know
they're
there's a
removing it. They're planning to remove it from
Oh.
JDK, and then there will be a separate jar that you can include in.
Okay. As we can see, I don't use JavaFX, but repeating for the people in Raleigh, it sounds like the plan is to have it be a separate jar that you download independently of the JDK. Any other questions?
Okay, great. Thank you very much.